Welcome to the Art Colony, a podcast about art and art history in Provincetown. My name is Gaston Lacombe. One thing that keeps surprising me in our little art colony here at the end of Cape Cod is the amazing layered diversity of some individuals. They don't limit themselves to one type of art or one profession or one specialty. They seem to have developed expertise in multiple fields. You peel back one layer to find another one, and so on. And our guest today is one of those people. The more I get to know him, the more I discover fascinating facets of his personality. So let's welcome to the art colonies. Okay, let's see. There's painter, muralist, oyster farmer, avid surfer, serious world traveler, and I'm sure there's stuff I'm missing there. But let's welcome Andrew Jacob.
All right. What a pleasure to be here. Thank you for
I'm
having
so
me.
happy you're here. You're probably the first person who came to my gallery when the podcast launched and said, "Hey, I love your podcast."
Yeah, it's just such a special thing that you're capturing, the oral language of Provincetown and yeah, just really getting it out into the ethos of the world there.
I'm very glad that you were one of the first listeners, and I'm very glad you're here today. So tell us, who is Andrew Jacob?
I'm a curious human being. I'm a father, a husband, a surfer, painter. I love traveling. I'm an oyster farmer and a New Englander.
So how long have you been around us here on the Cape?
Ever since I was born, I've been visiting the Outer Cape. My dad lived out here in the 60s. He was in the Navy. He was stationed out of Newport, Rhode Island. And he had a house. He would either live in Wellfleet or Eastham. So I've always had a tie to the Outer Cape. But, I was born in Boston and I grew up in the suburbs of Boston. But we would always come out. I had some grandparents out here. As I got older, I frequented more. But yeah, I have a lot of just nostalgic memories of being in Provincetown and in the beaches of Wellfleet and just immersed in the nature out here.
And at what point did you decide to move here and settle here?
I moved here around 2002 or 2003. Right around 2001, I was really spending a lot of time in Wellfleet. I was living in Boston. I was really involved in graffiti culture. So, the longer you involve yourself in graffiti culture, you usually run into a little bit of trouble. So I was having a little bit of trouble with the law, and I was working at a restaurant, so I'd put all my days together, conglomerated them into like 3 days. So I would just jet, maybe like Monday afternoon, and I would come down to Wellfleet, lay low, surf, and just enjoy, time in nature. And I was already really interested in art, so just checking out the galleries and just what Provincetown had to offer.
And just for our listeners who might not be familiar with the geography of the Cape, Wellfleet is 2 towns over, right?
Yeah.
Towns over. When we talk about the art colony of Provincetown, yes, it's Provincetown, but it's really the whole Outer Cape. There's a lot of artistic activity also happening in Truro, in Wellfleet, and Eastham. So you live in Wellfleet.
Yeah, there's quite a good amount of galleries in Wellfleet, but all the beaches I grew up surfing are in Wellfleet.
So let's go back a little bit. You already mentioned it. Your past with graffiti. How did that all get started?
I was always fascinated by graffiti, and probably like most people that aren't involved in the graffiti subculture, you just see names when you're traveling on like the trains or on the highway. I didn't know how to grasp it as a child. And then I had my mother's sister, my Aunt Mary. She lived in New York City, so we would spend a lot of time there in the summers. Just walking by the handball courts. I think that's kind of when I was first exposed to some of my favorite artists, like Keith Haring. I would see like Keith Haring murals, and then just handball courts with like lettered graffiti, and then just street graffiti tags and things I didn't understand. And as I got a little older, like maybe 13 or 14, I had a friend that was involved in graffiti, and he kind of, it's like an apprenticeship almost. Not so much these days because you have the internet, but back then, there's these complex letter forms, and you're really trying to bend letters to, there's something called wild style. So you're trying to twist those letters as much as you can to make them illegible, but legible to people that are part of the graffiti subculture. So that's like one aspect of the graffiti realm. But I think just like the anonymity of it always was exciting to me, seeing these names and having an idea in your mind, like who are these people? And then the more outlandish spots that they painted, whether it was like a rooftop or they were hanging off of something, and you just or on the train, there was this one writer in particular on my commuter rail from Salem that went into Boston and went right to the Boston Garden. This guy Realm, he was from Lynn, and the way he would wrap his head around the speed of the train and the way he would approach letters. So there'd be like a pillar and he would do like an R, then like 50 feet down the way, there'd be an E, then another 50 feet, then there'd be the L, then the M. So, it was almost like a stop motion animation, just the way he would play with the transit line or the commuter rail. Yeah, it was just another really fascinating aspect to me because it's not like you're comfortable in your studio and things kind of go which way as you're out there, usually under the cloud of darkness and yeah, like late at night or early in the morning. So all those things, yeah, it was just fascinating to me as a kid. And then the subculture of graffiti, most people are keeping a black book. So that's where I really learned, to this day, I'll spend like an hour every morning just drawing in a book, whether I'm just like writing down notes or just making like, your graffiti word is essentially like a mantra. So you're almost like a Tibetan monk. You're just practicing the same thing over and over and over and over. And it's every time you do it, it's just like any craftsman, it's gets a little bit sharper, a little more honed in. You have to put in those like 10,000 hours to become a master. But, now it's been, 30 years that I've been doing similar stuff. So all that, you just learn the craft of it and learn along the way.
So, did you have back then a style that defined you as a graffiti artist? Were you standing out from the rest? Could people say, "Oh, well, well, I don't know what was your name"?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'll say them on the pod. Like, well, I guess when I was a kid, I wrote cloak because I thought that was like such a great word. It was
Uh,
you're cloaked and the little mysterious. That was one of my favorite movies growing up. There was this movie called Cloak and Dagger. It was an '80s film about this young kid. Anyways, I always thought it was a great word. And with graffiti, you take liberties. So I could write it CLOAK or I could do CLOKE and little twists like that. I've always been attracted to really bright colors. So a lot of my young friends, when I was like 14 or 15, they would always call me the Easter Bunny because I'd always pick these like Easter y colors where most people were like, black and white, or they do like a red and yellow. Mine would always be these teals and pinks and yeah, purples, which are still like, they're always found in my paintings these days. So yeah, I guess that my particular color schemes would make me stand out a little bit.
how do you define yourself as an artist nowadays? Because the world of graffiti is still very much, I guess, I don't know if it defines your work, but it's visible in your work. That's the way to say it. But how do you define yourself as an artist?
Definitely like bold lines. That's one thing with a lot of graffiti writers. You're having like really bold outlines to your style of letters and repetitious patterns. So that's you know I guess more now, maybe more recognized with by my like psychedelic surf art, which is very similar. I think if a graffiti artist or anyone could maybe, yeah, like you're saying, compare the two because it's these bold, repetitious patterns, and there's anomalies within like each painting that I would do that I do now with my surf, like psychedelic surf stuff, similar sunsets and repetitious waves, but the color schemes are always changing. And I'm testing out new ideas color wise, but the form, for the most part, remains pretty similar. I'll switch things up, and you could compare that to graffiti, where people have similar letters, but the fills and you're just playing with the interior of the work.
So describe to our listeners, they're not here seeing your work right now.
Yeah,
Describe them. If they look at your work, if they look at your website, what will they see?
lots of murals. Illustration work. Now I'm doing lots of poster work for music festivals, things like that. Just because my, like I was saying, my art is so colorful, and I try to just embrace the joyous parts of life. Maybe I'm biased, but I think my art is fun to look at.
They'll see a lot of waves.
Yeah, definitely a lot of waves. I definitely paint a lot of owls too. So
Oh, owls, yes.
the owls are very similar in a way where it's kind of like this set shapes and patterns, and then the colors within those owls change. So again, it kind of ties back to my roots in graffiti with similar letter forms and bold styles, but then switching up colors and playing around with those.
Is being an artist part of Your upbringing, is it part of your family?
No, not really. I had an aunt that was an artist. My dad actually, we did have a lot of his. He did paint when he was younger. He would do these watercolors, so that always kind of like tripped me out as a kid. We had a lot of his paintings up, but I never saw him paint. And I would ask him about it, and he was like, "Oh, that was just like a little chapter in my life where for 5 years I did some paintings and some watercolors, and then he just kind of moved on and never really thought about it again." And I've always pushed him to now that he's older and retired. I'm like, what are you doing? You're just sitting around reading the newspaper. Why don't you paint? But he's just not motivated to. So that definitely, yeah. Now that you say that, it definitely was probably in my subconscious there. But my family, they always my mom just wanted me to be happy. So anything I was interested in, they were always had my
She was
back there.
buying those cans of spray paint.
Yeah, I don't think so, but,
Okay.
she definitely looked the other way when she knew, we were sneaking out and painting trains. And
Uh-huh.
because as a kid, we had a train yard, so, it wasn't like, transit art, it was more like the subway or not subway trains, but freight trains. That's what I had growing
Speaking
up.
of that, I saw something on, was it on your Instagram or somewhere else? There was some exhibit recently in Boston, which
Oh,
was all
yeah.
model trains. And was it a situation where you were all reproducing your tags on these model trains? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that was a really cool show. So, actually, it was my friend Jamie O'Neill and his wife, Elizabeth. Jamie has a studio in Provincetown at the just above you. He's on the 3rd floor.
At the
Um,
Whalers Wharf?
yeah, he does more like photorealism, but they put the show together. His wife created these miniatures, but she was trying to recreate these like icons of Boston. So she reached out to a few of us. Most of the show, like you're saying, was freight trains, but there was this one punk rock spot, kind of like the CBGBs of Boston, and it was called the Rat Skeller. So I asked her to make that for me, so I reproduced graffiti on that. But the show was amazing. There was just trains wrapping around the whole gallery. There was graffiti on the walls, and it was like an all-encompassing, like, Boston history graffiti show. There were writers. So, that's like the term you use with, you call other graffiti artists graffiti writers because you're writing on. So there were writers that, were from the 80s and the 90s, people that I looked up to that were part of the show. So that was really exciting just to have pieces next to them. And a lot of them have, it's a wild subculture. Some people go on to great heights and success in whatever it may be, like, abstract art or just their graffiti style work. Usually people morph away from that into more of a fine art. It was a real honor to be part of that show, and just the energy of the building and the opening was wild. There's so much anonymity there. You don't really know who's who. You might be right next to one of your favorite writers and they have work in the show, but you just don't know who they are because you don't put the work with a face. And the more bold you are, typically, the less people are going to know. You have a tighter and tighter circle, because it is a somewhat of a criminal activity. But for the most part, I would say, most graffiti artists, their intention isn't to write on someone's personal property or hurt anyone's feelings. It's just like a real need to write on things. So I think most graffiti artists have a code that they live by where it's just like man-made, industrial objects, highways, bridges, freight trains. When you do paint freight trains, there's a whole code of ethics there where you bring painter's tape and you go over all the numbers because that's how they track the trains. So you put the tape up, you paint your letters, and then people peel back the tape. So you're not messing with the guys that are working on the trains, and you don't want to complicate things. You just have this need to create art, and it's a beautiful thing because it's mobile. Where if you're in your studio or in a gallery, it's sitting there, and if you're painting graffiti on a highway, it's going to sit there. But on a train, that's what I think was one of the things that I thought was so fascinating about it as a kid. I'm just like a 14-year-old kid on my bike. I could ride my bike to this train yard. We would paint the trains, and then it would end up in like New Mexico or something, depending on which trains. And then as you got older and smarter, you'd say like, "Oh, this is a Boston, Maine train." So you knew it was only going to go as far as Maine, maybe up to the Canadian border. But other trains was like a Pacific Northwest, or you knew the right train routes. It could make it all the way across the country. And as a small kid in the suburbs, it was just exciting to have your art traveling. You don't know who's going to see it, and there was a smaller network back then, and like in the '90s. Now it's like a phenomenon. Like you can't find an unpainted freight train for the most part. But
Before we continue, I'd like to take a minute to thank two organizations. Recently, the Art Colony podcast received support grants from the Provincetown Economic Development Council and from the Arts Foundation of Cape Cod. These grants will be very helpful in funding part of this little show that my producer Chad Rossi and I have put together. So thank you very much. Also, thank you to Christopher, Joseph, and Matt, who left us tips at buymeacoffee.com. Thank you. And if you'd also like to help us out, you can leave us a tip at buymeacoffee.com/the Art Colony podcast, or just go to buymeacoffee.com and search for the Art Colony podcast. Thank you. So, Andrew, I assume you're not going around the Cape right now doing graffiti, right? But you are doing public art.
Yes, always looking to paint murals. A lot of times they're with friends. I've got a big mural in Eastham, kind of a self-commissioned mural. It was like a derelict gas station right across the street from Cumberland Farms with my friend Brian Butler, Adam O'Day, Shane, this guy Grease One from Colombia. That's like the fun of that spirit of just a bunch of people getting together, creating some art, bouncing ideas off each other. So
Didn't you paint a skate park as well?
yeah, I paint the Wellfleet skate park. They were having problems with graffiti there, so I just worked a deal out with the town where I would roll over the unwanted graffiti and create more colorful pieces that are just more open to the folks of Wellfleet and just the tourists in the summer. Basically, just keeping it colorful and not just tagging, which is a little more abrasive. Just colorful characters and just a little more well thought out. I've got another mural at the Governor Bradford in Wellfleet or in Provincetown. That's right there across the street from the old colony. You can kind of see it in the summer a little bit. Sometimes there's some landscaping there, flowers and stuff that kind of hide it from the street, but I think you can kind of catch it there, especially if you're at the Governor Bradford in the courtyard. And then I have ongoing murals. I have an ongoing mural in Ireland that I've been working on for about 5 or 6 years now. So I just pretty much completed that last year. I'll do like a few finishing touches this spring, but that's much different from any of my other mural art. Okay.
Such a fascinating story, your connection with Ireland. So tell us, first of all, what brought you to Ireland, and then we'll talk about how, you ended up expressing all of that through this gigantic mural.
Yeah, it's a wild story. So growing up, my mother is 100% Irish. She's not from Ireland, but her family is, and she grew up in Springfield, Massachusetts, which has a really big Irish contingency there. And there's almost like a little Ireland there. They had this club called the John Boy O'Reilly Club, and they had like an Irish newspaper. And like I said, I grew up in the suburbs, but anytime like a family member died or a relative, we would always go back to Springfield, and there'd be these wild, like kind of Irish funerals where everyone's just drinking whiskey and smoking cigarettes, and you'd be at these little. Also, it was a part of my life growing up, and my mother always said we were from this small island off of Ireland called the Blasket Islands, and our family was from the Great Blasket Island in particular. It's the only inhabited island off of this island chain. And this is in Southwest Ireland off of the Dingle Peninsula. So I always knew that. And my mother always told me that we were the descendants of the last king of the Blasket Islands, but that it really didn't add up to much. It wasn't like we were royalty. It was more like a governor, an overseer, just to settle disputes. So, I kind of knew that, but I just didn't really think too much of it. And as I got older, I'd read a little more. We had books in the house that kind of spoke of that, but again, didn't think too much of it. And about 10 or 11 years ago, there was this filmmaker, Mark Covino. He kind of documents historic American families. He'd made this great documentary that I saw. He had the premiere in Burlington, Vermont. It was called A Band Called Death. It was about these three brothers that had created like the first punk rock album ever. And long story short, it got shelved. It never got put out. And it was this amazing movie. So I was at that premiere and I met Mark, and he knew the story of my family. And he mentioned to me, he said, "Hey, this would make for a really great movie." And at the same time, I had just found out that I had a cousin, Dennis Kane, that lived out in Encinitas, California, and he was a surfboard shaper, and we had never met, but his my mother's last name's Kane. He's a Kane, and then we had a mutual cousin that kind of put all the pieces together, and the next thing I knew, we were going to Ireland making this movie. So the theme of it, I mostly ride a longboard as a surfer, and DK mostly rides shortboards. So it's kind of like a endless summer vibe to it, where I'm a longboarder, he's a shortboarder. We're on this adventure, and you kind of learn about the history of the Blasket Islands and just Ireland in general through our eyes while we're engaging with people and surfing. DK shapes the boards, and we had like I get like I said, we had never met, so it was kind of awkward because we're on camera meeting for the first time in Ireland, and we're trying to gauge each other's skill at surfing, but we're cousins, and it ended up just we were so similar in the end. Similar sense of humor, just so many things clicked for us. Like even like the first night that we went out, we'd flown all day. He flew in from California, and everyone crashed out. Everyone was exhausted. And we were like, all right, this is our first night in Ireland. We got to go out, have some Guinness, and party. So yeah, we're just very kindred spirits. We ended up making it to the Great Blasket Island. We saw my great grandfather's house, and it was really moving. And through that, we went back again the next year. The film, maybe it was like a year or two, the film was edited and completed, and then we premiered it all throughout the East Coast, the West Coast of the United States, and we went to Ireland to do like a big premiere there. Through that, they mentioned that I was an artist, and then things just kind of snowballed for me in Dingle, in the Dingle Peninsula, where there's a museum there called the Great Blasket Museum.
Because it has to be told that the islands are not inhabited anymore. At some point is it in the 50s?
The 50s,
They
yeah.
decided to evacuate everyone because it was getting too hard to maintain a population on this more or less isolated island.
Yeah, I think, just the young men and women on the island, they knew that there was electricity, there's movies in America, there's all this stuff going on, and they're just kind of stuck on this desolate island. So they're like, all right, we need to get out of here. So yeah, it was just like this whirlwind thing. We were there, we had this premiere at the Blasket Museum, which, it was so wild because it really just put everything into perspective, how meaningful it all was. There was a room that was a replica of my great grandfather's room, and it just talked about how he was the king, and essentially he was the king because he could read and write in Irish and English, and he would host people. And it's not like he had some his house. I think it was like him and his 10 kids and his goats and his sheep. They all lived in this like little shed, and then guests would come and visit in the summertime. And because when Ireland regained its independence, people are just fascinated by this little time capsule of Irish culture because they were so isolated from the mainland. A lot of times they couldn't even, the mainland's only like a mile away, but it's not like you could row when there's like 15-foot seas. So they were just trapped out there. So because of that, they became really good storytellers, really good authors, poets, musicians. So like a lot of that culture got lost to the mainland. And then, like I was saying, when Ireland regained its independence, that's where the historians from England and, like, say, Dublin would come, and they would stay on the Blasket Islands in the warmer summer months when you could travel there, and they would just take in this culture. And then a lot of the books from the island, the Great Blasket Island, became like curriculum that kids would read in elementary school and in high schools. So it's a real big part of just the Irish culture. So every year when I go back, yeah, I learn so much. I meet so many new cousins,
And you're working on this gigantic mural.
yeah, so it kinda just started off the side of this pub where it was kinda like a dreamscape I did. So the craft they would use to get from the island were these little rowboats called Nuvogs or Currigs. So usually it would take 2 or 3 men, and they were almost like they were oars, but they're like these sticks, and I've gotten to ride in one. They're wild because everything overlaps, so, just the learning curve, your knuckles are bloody, and they're a little unpleasant to learn on, but once you get them going, they really crank. They go so fast. So I had made this portrait of these 3 men rowing towards the island, and it was kinda in the section of this pub, but it's this long, like 40, 50-foot wall. The mural I initially did was about probably like 15 or 20 feet tall by 20 feet, but there was this open space. So selfishly, because it was funded by this festival in Dingle, I said, "Hey, I got something going here. I could definitely stretch this out." So the next year, I made another proposal to add a little something. I was going to do just a straight up portrait of my great great grandfather, who was the king, who was also the mail carrier. So his duty was the mailman, and if someone got sick, he would have to row them to the mainland. So there's this a picture of him from like the 1800s or the very early 1900s. He's standing on the mainland with like his mail carrier sack, and he's just looking so proud and stoic that whether he's made it there or delivered the mail, whatever is just it's this great photo. So I repainted that, and then every year I've gone back and I've just found old. I've gone to the museum and I found old relic photos and portraits of the islanders, and I've tried to just kind of just paint a broader picture, at least from my perspective. I hope I'm doing like the Irish, the people of Dingle and all of Ireland, like a service. I don't know if I am, but from my perspective, I'm trying to paint all the figures, whether it's like a famous author. I did this woman, Peg Sayers, who's a well-known author that's part of the curriculum. Who at first I thought it was going to be a great thing, everyone's going to love it, but you know, it'd be like reading like Moby Dick or something. I guess it's like this really hard read to read like the Peg Sayers book. So all the Irish people are like, "Oh, we hate Peg Sayers. Like, why'd you put her on the wall?" But they really do love her. I've done like the last children that were born. There's this boy called the loneliest boy. He was like the last young kid on the island, and he had no one to play with, and he would just kind of be like essentially live in solitude. It was him and all these elderly people. And then I tried to do like little scenes, like landscape scenes of people painting or people rowing, and the goats and the sheep, and this other author, Thomas O'Crahan. So yeah, basically every year chip away at it and paint a broader scene of like the all encompassing feel of the island, at least from my perspective.
And you are bringing Provincetown artists along with you there.
Yeah, this year I've had my friend Stephen Wells. He's come the past couple years doing plein air painting, which has been great. Irene McGrath has been there, and this year we're gonna have a little beachcomber crew, which is gonna be great. I know Dennis Minsky, who's a great author and naturalist, Pete Khalil, Bob Lapointe. Yeah, no, just a couple great artists from the Beachcomber that will, really add to it because they're so intrigued by my liaison there, Joan. She was asking me, so like, where's your studio? And I was explaining to her where my studio was, and I was like, oh, my studio's in Provincetown. I live in Wellfleet. I'm an oyster farmer, but I have this amazing studio that I use. And she was like, what are the Beachcombers? So I gave her a little insight into that, and then she said, "Well, this would be great next year if we could bring some of these guys because just having Stephen Wells doing plein air painting in town, it really sparked a lot of interest. Like, who's this American guy just around town painting and bringing all this life?" So,
It's funny, I had made the connection because I had seen Stephen's Instagram with him being in Ireland, but I had made the connection that's where he was and
yeah,
he was with you.
yeah.
Yeah.
I know he's so fascinated by that like pagan culture, and this is kind of like a
Mhm.
pagan festival. And I kept telling him, I said, "Hey, you'd really love this festival." And he's been there like the past 4 years now because I think it's crazy. It'll be like I think my 10th year going to it.
Yeah.
So
And it's funny, we're developing a little Provincetown art colony in exile
yeah,
across the way in Ireland.
yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned very rapidly in passing there, oh, and I'm an oyster farmer.
Oh yeah.
That's a big deal. So how does that work? How did you start doing that?
Well, I've always kind of just picked in Wellfleet. We have like a wild oyster stock, so it kind of supplement me, between gallery shows. Because at one point I was just a full time artist doing commission work, illustrations, design. For a while, I was working for different beer can companies doing like beer labels. Yeah, just being a single man, it was enough for me to support myself. Kind of balling on a budget, but I was getting by. But then once I knew I was gonna have a family, I'm married and I have 2 boys. So I kinda always had oystering in my back pocket, the wild picking where that's just you're just literally going out gathering a bushel of oysters, which is roughly like 500 oysters. You could do that a day and, make a good little supplement there, extra 1,000 or $2,000 a week just picking wild oysters with no real, all you need is a wild license and you're in there, not really much to it.
Can you do that year round?
Yeah, you can pick wild oysters year round. I mean, people make a living off of that. It's a great way to live because there's really nothing to it. It's just you, your will, an oyster knife, and a basket, and that's all you need. Where with oyster farming, now I have an oyster farm. There's a whole infrastructure. There's racks and these things called condos and bags. You've got seed, you're trying to catch seed. It's wild. I mean, I love it. It's so fun. And it's very liberating because now I have like a steady paycheck. And I the best thing about oystering is the way the industry kind of runs is you're your own farm. There's no wrong way to farm. Our farms are all pretty close to one another, but my farm might look totally different from my neighbor's farm, kind of like an artist studio. They're all just wild, and from up above, they might just look insane, but there's always, a method to the madness in a lot of ways. As an artist, it's liberating because then now I have a steady paycheck, and it's not like I have to create a painting and, have my fingers crossed, wish that someone will buy this painting or that's not sometimes in the back burner in my mind. Like, is someone going to like this painting? Now I could care less. I mean, obviously, I want people to be happy, but I can paint whatever I want, and sometimes I'm just working on paintings, and I know, I mean, who knows where they'll end up. When I do get a commission, it's still very exciting to have something that somebody wants or desires or give me some input. If I'm in my studio painting and I just need to get out and like clear the air, be like, you know what, I'll time it all around low tide, go out on my farm, I'm listening to music or a podcast, and kind of like what I was getting at earlier, there's basically I just get a text like someone will say like, all right, the truck is going to be at the pier at this time on this day. Can you bring this many oysters? And I'll say yes. And then you just back your truck up and that's it. I don't have to really ever talk to anybody. I'm self-contained on my farm, and you're just immersed in nature. And I just have so much time to think and philosophize and listen to your podcast. And
And these oysters have made their way into your art, I have seen.
yeah. Yeah, actually, recently, my friend Jake Puffer, he's part of this, what was formerly SPAT, now it's called the Wellfleet Oyster Alliance. He's doing a public art project in Wellfleet, and he's usually commissioning. In the beginning, it was strictly artists that are also oystermen or oyster women. It was myself, Sonia Woodman, and Abe Storer. So we got the first three pieces. They're exterior. They're not canvases. They're on metal. But we created these public pieces, and then he put them around town. So mine's right next to town hall, attached to Abiyoyo. So I did this really funky, kind of contorted oyster farmer, like proud, holding his bushel basket, and it's kind of a he put little plaques on them too, if you want to go and read it. But mine was a self portrait of me in the Herring River, which was one of my favorite spots to pick wild oysters because it's really hard to get out there. You can't drive out there by car. You can't really walk. So my technique was I would go out on a stand up paddleboard. So going out's pretty easy. You're just on a stand up paddleboard. You're going out with the current. I would try to time it out perfect. So I'd drift all the way out to this outer little oyster reef. I would anchor up my stand up paddleboard. I would fill it up, try to get my bushel. I'd wait for the tide to turn, and then I would ride the tide back to my truck and, try not to fall in and lose my catch. So it was like a self portrait of me holding my bushel and just being proud of these beautiful golden oysters.
And you
It,
also have done work with a festival.
the Wealthy Oyster Fest.
Mm-hmm.
I've done some posters for them in the past, and now I have an oyster booth at Oyster Fest,
Yeah.
which is, man, that's a wild weekend there. Just a lot of people coming to town. They close up downtown Wellfleet, and we sell a lot of oysters, and it's just a big party. It's a lot of fun. Now I have like my whole entire family helping me, which is great. So you have just a booth, your oysters. You've got friends that know how to shuck, friends that are learning how to shuck, people handling money, and it's just a really joyous occasion. And you just see how passionate people are about the Wellfleet oyster, which is a world famous oyster, and just how delicious they are. And I'll make like mignonettes and sauces, and there's great music.
One thing that really boggles my mind about you, when I see you on social media, it's like 20 degrees outside, but no, he's out surfing. You're surfing all the time. You're
Yeah,
really passionate about that.
yeah, I love surfing. It makes me
Year round.
so happy. Yeah, in the winter, it's almost. I mean, I like warm water surfing too, but there's a divide there. Like how cold people will go. I mean, I've got friends that are even crazier than me that'll go. I mean, when it's like in the negatives, It's hard. You know, you see a breaking wave and you just can't think clearly. You just all you want to do is run home, get your wetsuit on, and just jump in the ocean. And I mean, I would say me along with all my friends, you're gonna surf until your limbs are you can barely feel your feet. You've got borderline hypothermia. You know, when you love it that much, man, yeah, you just don't even think of the elements. You're just thinking of the shape of the wave, how good it is. And yeah, it's just such a special thing, you know, there's so much solitude here in the winter, you know, you're just out with a few of your friends, you're looking up, there's no one on the beach, there's no one on the dunes, uh, the wildlife totally changes, you know, it's a different type of bird out there, like, this time we'll have, like, eiders and interesting ducks, and, you know, soon enough, like, once March hits, we'll start seeing the whales again, and, you know, we always have the seals around. Yeah,
What
it's
about the other one?
the sharks, yeah. The sharks, yeah, it's they're spooky. You gotta kinda, like, always be on guard in the summer months. Kinda like, tying into, like, Hawaiian culture, you know, everyone there's, like all the elders are like aunties and uncles, so it's kinda like that in the summer. We have all the kids on the inside, and all the aunties and uncles are on the outside, maybe on longboards. We're so lucky because the water's so clear here, so we're really keeping an eye on things. You know, you almost get like a yeah, like a sixth sense. You know, you see like a seal acting weird or anything. Sometimes you just get like a sharky or like a, you know, like
Sharky sense?
yeah, yeah, you're just like something's up. It's definitely always on my mind in those warmer months. Typically the sharks show up like around June or July and then they're here till like October, November. Some of them, you know, they linger. You'll see them in like December, but for the most part, I think the sharks are just trying to coexist with us. I think they all have unique personalities. So some of the sharks are kind of bullies, but for the most part, they're all good people and they're just trying to go on their way. And I'm always on the longest board, and you just don't want to be the slowest paddler.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, from the pictures I've seen on social media, it's a big community event. These surfing, you could call them parties, I guess. But there's a lot of families, there's a lot of children, as you were saying. There's also other artists who go there.
hmm
Because I know Chris Kelly, for example, he goes surfing there as well. So it looks like a really fun time.
Yeah. There's a lot of camaraderie out there. Mostly it's like parking lot camaraderie because if the waves are good, at least for me, like I'm not trying to talk to anyone. I'm just trying to stay focused. Because you're really, you know, like the thing with surfing is it's like it's pattern recognition. So you're looking so far out, like sometimes like a mile out at sea, and you're just trying to see the front runners of those waves come in, and you're constantly positioning yourself. When you see a good wave coming, you know, it's all about the bathymetry. You're trying to make a map in your mind of the sandbar underneath, 'cause if you're just off by 5 feet, you might miss, like, the best wave of your life, so you're always trying to position yourself, and, you know, there's, like, camaraderie out there, and, you know, I want my friends to get good waves, but I want the good waves too, so it's all about me first and then them second, and I'd say most surfers are the same way. You know, after I get a great wave, when I'm paddling back out, of course, I wanna see my friends be riding great waves, but it's selfish in that sense where you know, you're trying to get the best barrel of the day, the best wave of the day. But like I was saying, yeah, it's not like you're just sitting out there. You're constantly shifting and moving around, and you're always using your mind. There's I think that's like the one thing like non-surfers don't understand is just how much movement there is and strategy and just you know just like that positioning. And like I was saying, like pattern recognition. It's fascinating. You see a line and you just know the depth of that wave is going to hit the sandbar a particular way. So you're like, all right, I got to get 10 feet this way. And then it also is like rhythm. So if a good wave hits here, you know, like, okay, in 15 minutes, one's going to hit way out here in between where everyone is. And people will see you paddle to a particular spot and like, this guy's crazy. Like, why is he going over there? And all of a sudden the perfect wave comes and you're in the right spot. And, you know, you'll see that. That's why kind of like, maybe like Texas Hold'em poker. It's not just luck. There's so much skill there when it comes to
It's funny
those
when
little
you're
things.
talking about rhythms and patterns and planning. I'm just thinking, I wonder if that also affects the way he approaches his art.
Definitely. I mean, you can see it in like the psychedelic surf art I do. It's all just rhythm and pattern, and most of my paintings are a little more conceptual. Like they might just look straight up, just surf art. But as a kid, I was like really fascinated by Carl Sagan and just outer space. So most of those paintings are supposed to be otherworldly. So like my titles are like quasars quests or you know cosmic crests. So they're supposed to be waves. I always just think about that, and like there was this one bit that Carl Sagan talked about. There's this thing called the Drake equation, and it's just this mathematical equation of how many other Earth-like planets there could be in the universe. So as a little kid, that sparked my interest. I was like, well, be already being interested in surfing. I was like, could there be other planets that have exact surf like our planets? So then as I got more involved in painting waves, I was like, well, it's one thing just painting earthly waves, but I could make these like supernatural or other dimensional or just these cosmic waves. And each one, yeah, like it's like a burst of light in the middle, which might not necessarily be a sun. It could be like a quasar or, any kind of other planetary element.
And
So
we're catching you right now as you're about to leave for your annual surfing trip to Costa Rica.
yeah, that's a fun trip. I like having time to just reflect every year. And down there, I'm drawing a lot. I've partnered up with this artist Mael Victory in Costa Rica, so he has this amazing studio down there. So I've gotten really lucky. He's another guy. Just he's a younger kid I just met through graffiti. He saw like some of my tags down there, and we became friends. And he has this incredible studio where he does big abstract pieces. So we collaborate on big abstract pieces. And I mean, these, yeah, biggest paintings I've ever done. They're like 8 feet by 8 feet. We'll stretch them out. We actually did a big show at the Ragosa Gallery in East Ham 2 years ago. He flew in. We stretched out a series of 5 paintings we did together. We painted them pretty quick in his studio, and he has a really good sound system. So he would say like, "All right, you be the DJ." So I would say, "You ever heard of this album?" He's like, "No." So I would put on like a great album. I mean, it's tough sometimes collaborating with another artist, especially on a bigger piece. I would kind of paint something, and then he would paint something, and we'd kind of keep to each side of the canvas, and then he would take a brush and he would go over something I just painted. Then he would kind of look at me for my reaction, like, "All right, is this guy like is he pissed or what?" And then I would go over something of his, and then we'd be like, "All right, let's do this." So after the first painting, we really had like a lot of rhythm and chemistry there. So we just kept going at it, and over like I'm usually there like a month and a half. Over a month and a half, we had created some. Once we did that one, we did another one. And I was like, "Hey, we can't just do two. We got to at least do three. Have like a series." And then once we did three, we're like, "All right, let's do five." So we created these 5 big pieces. He came here. His parents came in from Costa Rica. His mom's from France, maybe Paris, but his dad's from Austria. But they've been in Costa Rica for like 30 years. Anyways, they flew out here just to support him. Like I said, he's a younger artist. He's maybe like 22 or something, but really great, kind of like a prodigy abstract painter. So we had this great show, and a couple of the pieces are at the Commons. If you go down into, I think it's like maybe one of the libraries downstairs. I have a big, maybe the 8 foot by 8 foot, like one of my favorite pieces. We got to hang it in the Commons. So
Yeah, I
there's,
was about to ask if these were the same paintings that you showed at the Commons, which was about a year ago.
yeah, last year that I took it from the Ragosa, and then I got to show them all at the
Okay,
Commons
because
last
those were
year.
very large paintings you had at the Commons.
Yeah, it was great. And I did another mix of like some other boats and a couple other works I had. It was like an all encompassing show, but I really wanted to showcase those paintings again because I don't know if the P Town crowd really got to see. We had a big turnout at the Ragosa Gallery, but yeah, I wanted to get them up here. They're just big old pieces, and they need like that room just held them beautifully. You had a lot of space to like just relax and look at them, and the lighting's so nice in there, and yeah, just the greater Provincetown community. I want to like share those with everyone up here.
So, as you're about to leave for Costa Rica, do you have similar projects already in the works or planned?
Yeah, I'll most likely be back in Miles' studio. We'll create some art, and mostly, I'm just like illustrating there all the time with my kids. Like I have a pretty good practice every morning. I sit and draw for about an hour, just whether it's like characters or ideas or thoughts or not necessarily doodles, but yeah, I'm always drawing like when I'm drinking coffee, and then there, yeah, it'll just be like a lot of times I just collect driftwood from this river that I surf. So I'll surf, and there's like these rocks, and all this driftwood gets wedged in. It's all like these indigenous hardwoods. So I'll take the indigenous hardwoods, dry them out, sand them a little bit, and I'll make these small little paintings. And that's kind of how, like, again, it's like what happened in Ireland. It was like a snowball effect. I used to do that like 20 years ago, and then I would just have a hammer and nail, and I would tack them into like man-made posts like on the beach trails, and always like there's really dusty roads, so I'd always do like little dusty waves. Like I'd implement my waves in the dust of the cars. People started to recognize my waves down there, and then that turned into jobs and painting murals down there. I've got like a couple clothing stores I have like a mural on. Sometimes if there's a skate park there, if there's a skate jam, I'll do like posters for that. And then like just little boutique hotels, I've gotten to do murals there. I'd met this Italian guy about 10 years ago. He came to one of my art shows in Costa Rica, and it was like this dream project. He said, "Hey, I'm creating this boutique hotel. I would love it, like each room to be a mural with your art in it." So, I was like, all right, this sounds too good to be true. But it all panned out. I would spend like a month in each room, and I would wear out like my 3-month visa. I'd come back to the United States, come up with new ideas, and go back. So I did, that for a few years, which was pretty wild. Yeah, just like living the dream. He would make me like these beautiful Italian meals. I'm right on the beach. I'm surfing in the morning, and then I'm just painting all afternoon while it's hot. It was a dream.
That sounds like the life.
Yeah, it was so nice.
So, Andrew, we're getting towards the end of the interview here, and let's do a rapid round. You ready?
Okay, sure.
Okay. Paintbrush or spray paint?
I think, I guess spray paint. Yeah.
Why?
Just I love paintbrushes, but with spray paint you can have different tips, and you can really, you can drag your hand out, and it can go from this really, really thin, crispy line to this big, flared out, interdimensional pocket of paint. So there's nothing else that can really replicate that. And just gesturally, writing your name big is just so liberating.
Large format or small format?
I think large format, just again, ties surfing in, like a wave when you're a surfer. It's just so gestural, the lines you draw, and very similar to a big painting. You can just really stretch your arms out as wide as you can and really get loose. It's a powerful feeling.
I have to try that out.
Yeah.
Everything I do is pretty much small format, so
Yeah.
I'll hang out with you more. Okay. Summer surfing or winter surfing?
I'd have to say winter surfing. Just nothing feels better after you're borderline hypothermic, and I'll always drive back in my wetsuit and just opening my suit up and just fill it up with hot water. Your hands are burning because they're so cold, and then after you're like sitting on the couch, and whether it's like a bowl of soup or like a cup of tea or something, just warming up, it's like such a euphoric feeling. You feel like you really accomplished something when you're out there in the elements in the winter.
Since you're an oyster farmer, clams or scallops?
Scallops. I love scallops. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're so lucky because we have a Cape Tip. I think like Chris King, he's got like some of the best scallops in the world, the ones he pulls out.
And do you fish any of the scallops up, or is that just not what you do?
I mean, I have bay scallops that show up on my farm, but they're so petite and they're so cute. So I'll pick them up, and but I can't bring myself to eat them. They have their little eyes, and they're so cute. So I just always catch and release, put them right back. Yeah.
Cape Cod waves or Costa Rica waves?
Cape Cod. I mean, nothing beats catching great waves right in your backyard. It's the best feeling.
And last question, since I know you like dressing up, Halloween or Carnival?
Halloween.
Yeah.
It's my favorite. I grew up, in Old Salem Village. Yes, Halloween, Salem, all those things have always been such a big part of my life. And I get to throw a Halloween party here in Provincetown every year, which is a real honor. So, Halloween. I love Halloween. I celebrate it starting like usually the third week of September. I start every morning. Me and my youngest son, we watch the Garfield Halloween cartoon special before school.
Well, cool. And thank you for inviting me to your Halloween party.
Oh, yeah.
This last one. Well, I'm so happy you were able to come on the podcast because there's so much to talk about. I'm sure we could go on for another hour, but, we try to keep it to 1 hour.
This is great. It's been such an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, and have a great time in Costa Rica.
I will. I'll be thinking everyone here.
Okay.
I'm drinking a pina colada on the beach.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. Maybe you could grab a pina colada, too.
Yeah. All right. Right on.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.